welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. For Thursday, July 25th, the Kamala Coronation edition. I'm Emily Bazelon from the New York Times Magazine and Yale Law School. David Plotz is away this week, but we are very lucky to be joined by Ruth Marcus, who is an associate editor and columnist for The Washington Post. Hi, Ruth.
Hi. Did anything happen this week?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I was away. It was a little foggy, but I think maybe. And also, of course, joining us is John Dickerson of the CBS News Daily Report. Hey, John.
Hi. I'm here, but I'm foggy.
Well, yes, there was a lot of news this week. I was supposed to be on vacation, and yet it kept coming. So the race for the presidency of the United States has transformed with dizzying speed. On the show today, we will talk about Joe Biden's decision to step aside. How and why did he decide to leave the race? And what does his decision say about him and the Democratic Party? Our second topic is Kamala Harris. How has it come about that she has an apparent lock on the nomination within just a few days from Biden's decision? And what are we learning so far about her candidacy and how the Trump-Vance campaign will respond to their new reality? Our third topic is the Secret Service and the self-described utter failure of law enforcement to prevent the assassination attempt against Trump of a couple of weeks ago. What went wrong, and what does it mean for the agency whose mission is to safeguard the nation's top officials? And finally, we'll have cocktail chatter, and our Slate Plus episode will be Ruth and me talking about Judge Aileen Cannon's ruling dismissing the classified documents case against Donald Trump in Florida, based on her theory that the appointment of special counsel Jack Smith was unconstitutional. This is news from the week before last that I missed, and I am so eager to hear Ruth's take on it because she wrote a great piece about it.
Hey there, Gabfest listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI and stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence.
So let's start with Joe Biden, still our president, no longer the Democratic candidate for president. Biden took 3 weeks to drop out of the race after his disastrous debate performance. He finally bowed to political reality after trying everything he could to avoid it, at least publicly. He was giving fiery campaign speeches. He was doing TV interviews, kind of shaky, but putting himself out there. He claimed he had his own polls that showed he could still win in the face of a lot of public polling that suggested he was way behind in the swing states. And then finally, it seemed like some other people weighed in. And at least to me, it looked like Biden just really didn't have a choice. But John, how do you think he came to his decision? Who in the end played the key roles and how was this managed?
Well, he played the key role. I mean, which is to say that he finally succumbed to two pieces of data, the polling data and the money data, which is that he just kept being told that the money isn't going to be there and it isn't there. And then he was told not just were his fortunes sinking, but the fortunes of Democrats across the board, all the Senate candidates and House candidates that they care most about. And then he was told in various increasing tones that if he didn't make a decision, more people would come out against him from within his own party. Congressman Jamie Raskin, I think, was the biggest, most recent one before Biden decided to pull out. But after the brief pause that this movement took during the assassination attempts against Donald Trump, it then picked up with a vengeance. So he came to the decision, obviously in consultation with his wife and his top aides, but none of that would have been made, and I don't think was made if he hadn't decided himself. In other words, Jill Biden didn't go to him and say, or at least there's no reporting that I saw that had sort of Jill Biden going to him and saying, it's over, buddy. And in fact, on Wednesday night, the 24th, after Biden gave his address from the Oval Office, Jill Biden sent out a note on social media that said, thank you to all those who were loyal and who never wavered. A shot, I think it's fair to say, at those who pressured him to get out of the race. And Joe Biden wrote, to those who never wavered, to those who refused to doubt, to those who always believed, my heart is full of gratitude. Thank you. So, they're still wounded. And all of our reporting suggests he's still quite wounded. And he said, I think I could carry out my duties, but it wasn't to be. So even in the end, after having made the decision, internally, the president and his wife still feel like they could have done it.
Yeah, it seems clear this was a really hard decision from Biden's point of view, obvious as it seemed to a lot of other people. I mean, Ruth, what did you think about the role that Nancy Pelosi played? It looked like that was really important, at least to me. What do you think?
I could not have scripted that question better because I agree with everything that John had to say, but as he was talking about Biden being the decision maker here, I just had this image of Nancy Pelosi not accepting Biden's announced decision that he was staying in the race until the Lord Almighty came to him and told him it was time to leave. The Lord Almighty did not arrive, but Nancy Pelosi, who showed herself as Speaker of the House to be an incredibly adept and insightful about human nature player in managing her caucus, also managed what I would call the long goodbye of President Biden in this moment. She understood, like maybe only a mother and grandmother of however many she's a grandmother of now can, the role of human nature here, and that she needed, and the Democrats who became increasingly convinced that this was unsustainable for Biden to remain as the nominee, that he was not going to go gently. And that the more you pushed, the more resistant he would be. And so this needed to be done with exquisite care and delicacy and respect for his feelings and his pride and his, I think John's completely right, continuing to this moment belief that he would prosecute the case against Donald Trump and has a better chance of beating Donald Trump than the alternative, which he always tells us to compare himself to. But she calibrated this so that the pressure increased and increased and increased on Biden until it came to the point where he recognized what I think everybody else had recognized 2 or 3 weeks earlier, which was that he had to go.
It was really interesting to watch the leaking increase. I mean, the Biden administration has not been a place of a lot of leaking. And then suddenly it was like we were hearing about everything. And there was this moment in the reporting where Pelosi apparently said, put Donnellan on the phone, referring to Mike Donnellan, Biden's advisor, when she was talking to Biden. And this was about the polls and whether it was really plausible for Biden to argue that he had a chance to catch up in the swing states, just sort of adding that moment to the picture of this internal struggle that was going on. So does Biden's decision to step aside show that the Democratic Party at this moment is kind of fundamentally different than the Republican Party, in that Biden can make this claim, and he did this in his speech, that he was putting the country above himself, that the country's interests matter more than a party leader? And that this is a kind of difference between the Republican Party's fealty to Donald Trump, despite, his felony conviction and all his January 6th involvement, versus the Democrats saying, you know what, we realize our guy may not be able to make it to the end of his second term. And so we're putting someone else up in there.
So I think there's been a lot of understandable self-congratulation among Democrats on 2 levels. One is the ritual incantation that the president has done this incredibly selfless act by voluntarily, in air quotes, stepping aside. He did do a selfless act, certainly if you compare him to the behavior of Donald Trump. But as Winston Churchill is said to have said, he came to the right decision only after, like America, only after rejecting all the others. It took a really long time. It was not selfless. It was a recognition of reality. And at the same time, the Democrats are commending themselves for being less slavishly loyal to their dear leader than Republicans are. And I would say both parties, the leaders and the foot soldiers in both parties, the political foot soldiers, have something in common, which is they're all operating in what they perceive to be their self-interest. So there were some brave Democrats. You mentioned Jamie Raskin, Adam Schiff, Mark Warner behind the scenes, others, Peter Welch, who came out in the pages of the Washington Post, Home Team Plug, who spoke out. But mostly these were not profiles in courage on the Democratic side any more than they have been on the Republican side. Biden is no Trump in the best possible way, which is Democrats are more loyal to their own self-interest and the party than they are to Biden. They're less cowed by Biden than Republicans are about Trump. But I'm just going to throw a little cold water on the back patting that's happening here.
Biden said that in his speech on Wednesday night, he sort of said the momentousness and the unprecedented nature of a president stepping aside in the middle of a re-election campaign was all because the moment is so dire and democracy is under such threat, and the very notion of character and truth and honesty in the office is up for grabs, which is the smartest political way to put it. But obviously there's a different way to see it, which is, of course, he had to leave the race because the leaders in his party forced him out because he was incapable of carrying out the rest of the race, let alone 4 more years. And that raises the question of whether the unprecedented nature of what he did is actually points an arrow at what Republicans would call cover-up of his deficiencies in office as president. And so that question still lingers out there. And if you buy that idea that there were a number of Democrats, whether it's the very inner circle of Joe Biden or a number of Democrats who interacted with the president and overlooked his deficiencies, then you have behavior that seems very cultish, which is we can't say anything about our leader for fear of hurting our chances or hurting his feelings. So that's an open question that seems in the category of what Ruth is talking about, which is not laudatory behavior by the Democrats. One thing I would say is a very stark difference between the two parties is Republican leaders like Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy and Lindsey Graham, who spoke out and said that Donald Trump was responsible for the attack on the Capitol, who thought his career was over, who spoke in moral terms about what he'd done to the country, have now all totally reversed themselves. And why did they do that? Because the voters of the party are different among Republicans and Democrats. The energy from the Republican Party rank and file, the very most ideologically powerful members of what is now the Republican Party say, don't you dare jettison Donald Trump. They're not saying that on the Democratic side. The rank and file Democrats are deliriously happy about the new choice. And so I would say that's one way in which the rank and file are quite different in these two parties.
I just wanted to throw in one thought before we have to start looking to the future, because wallowing in the past is so much fun here. I had been increasingly frustrated with President Biden's unwillingness to accept reality. I woke up just seething on Saturday morning about how this was continuing and whether he would just insist on sticking it out, which I guess he could have, though it would have been incredibly ugly. But I actually think in the end that the long 3 weeks that we all endured, although some of us were on vacation, Emily, may have ended up working to Democrats' advantage. They lured the Republicans into having a convention that now seems irrelevant. It was focused against a nominee who was no longer the Democratic nominee. President Trump picked a vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, assuming, though I don't think he should have, that he was running a different race than the one he's turning out to have run. So I think in a weird way, I'm really curious what you guys think about this, that President Biden's intransigence ended up being a perhaps unintended plus.
Yeah, that's such an interesting idea. I mean, I think it all depends on whether you think the Democrats would have been better off with some kind of competition for replacing Biden, as opposed to what we're seeing, which is Harris quickly locking it up. So I was reading a piece by Graham Wood in The Atlantic that John pointed us to. And Graham was arguing that the Democrats didn't just have an age problem with Biden. They also had an information problem, which, John, you were talking about earlier, this idea that they were protecting Biden and not really telling people everything about what shape he was in. And so then Graham was arguing that by just going with Harris, they're creating another kind of information gap, which is like, we don't know what it would be like if she were tested against other candidates in this moment. And just to Monday morning quarterback, if Biden had immediately stepped down 3 weeks ago, I think it would have been more likely that there would have been both appetite among Democrats and time for such a kind of mini primary process to unfold, which, like, at first, people like Pelosi and Representative Jim Clyburn and former President Obama all called for. So I guess, like, yeah, I don't know, John, what do you think? Like, do you think Ruth is right that this 3 weeks unfolded in the end to Democrats' advantage because it threw Trump and then Trump Vance off the scent? Or is it just like not a good idea to be having Harris in this position so quickly?
I totally agree with Ruth. That is the result. And as you framed it, Ruth, it's unintended, but it did have that result. I think I would add one more thing, which is it loaded the enthusiasm cannon for the moment when that 3 weeks could get resolved. So in other words, the suffering that went on, all the text chains that were firing up among worried Democrats erupted in delight when they had something that could relieve them of the frustration that had been building for 3 weeks. Had that frustration not built for those 3 weeks, it may not have exploded in the massive fundraising haul and enthusiasm detonation that Harris has been received by, or that has received Harris. And we can talk about whether that's just a sugar high or what, to mix all the metaphors. So I think all of that is true. Does a mini primary of full and open competition ensure a better outcome? That relies on a lot of things that are not in evidence. One thing that is not in evidence is that the Democratic Party, when they have open fights, get better and present a sharper, smarter vision of the party. Given the animus that was taking place among all the people over the question of whether Biden should go, that animus would have channeled into a new thing, which would have been a series of competitions. This is I'm accepting the frame here of an open mini primary with several people running. There was a lot of anger in the system among Democrats. That would not have gone away. It basically seems to have gone away now with Harris. Instead of going away under this scenario, that would have been channeled into the candidacies of various people. And you would have had fights among those various people that would have been a proxy for this underlying irritation about having forced Biden out. That would have been pretty ugly, I think. And by the way, these kinds of fights are always ugly. And it's not so certain that in today's media environment that a big ugly fight among Democrats in the end emerges with a unified, sharp Democratic message that would have been better than the Democratic message as it exists today, which is all behind Kamala Harris, who has a tidy argument about her former history as a prosecutor relative to the felon. And, we'll get to this, but her message seems pretty tidy. So would they have come out with a more tidy message after a mini primary? Not sure. Final point is Clyburn, Pelosi, Obama, Schumer, Jeffries, they all had to pause and not rush instantaneously to Harris because they're reading the landscape and going, how many people are unhappy about this, about Biden being pushed out, about Harris, are they happy for Harris? I mean, it would have been weird for them and probably not so great if they had the nanosecond on Sunday that Biden dropped out rushed to Harris. So I'm not sure it was desire for a mini primary or opposition to Harris that delayed them, but rather let's read the party and see exactly what's in its best interest when we decide when and how to endorse her.
This episode is brought to you by Z-Biotics. There's now a game-changing product to use before a night out with drinks. It's called Z-Biotics. Let's face it, after a night with drinks, it can be tough to bounce back the next day. You have to make a choice. You can either have a great night or a great next day. Z-Biotics is a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. No more tough choice. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's that byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Go to zbiotics.com/Gabfest to get 15% off your first order when you use Gabfest at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/Gabfest and use the code Gabfest at checkout for 15% off. If you're looking for a simple yet sophisticated investing experience, check out public.com. From stocks to options, bonds to crypto, it's all there. You can even earn an industry-leading 5.1% APY on your cash. Public is trusted by millions of investors, and NerdWallet just gave Public 4.6 stars and calls it an impressive experience. Sign up in 2 minutes at public.com, all your investing in one place. This is a paid advertisement for Public investing. 5.1% APY as of June 17th, 2024, and is subject to change. NerdWallet overall rating 4.6 out of 5 as of May 2024. Full disclosures in the podcast description. Let's move on to our second topic, which is Kamala Harris. Easy segue here. So, Kamala Harris emerges unchallenged as Biden's replacement on the ticket. She raised a record $81 million in her first day when she declared. And I think, as both of you have said, there's been a wave of relief among Democrats and a wave of pretty organic enthusiasm for her, which I have to say, some of it surprises me. I'm used to the idea that, Harris, she did a bad job in the 2020 primary. She dropped out early. She hasn't been a particularly popular vice president. Democrats are kind of stuck with her. And instead, within the party, people seem like they're quickly rallying to her side. So, Ruth, what do we know about Harris's candidacy so far? And do you think this initial wave of enthusiasm is going to dissipate as Trump and Vance figure out how to attack her effectively and she kind of gets thrown into the maw of, the general election politics?
So I think that so many things were unexpected here. The instantaneous way in which she secured the nomination. I don't know if John was surprised by that, but I simultaneously was surprised, and as it unfolded, it seemed almost inevitable that it worked out that way. So I was kind of hitting my hand on my head on Sunday as I watched these dominoes falling and all the potential rivals asserting that they had absolutely no interest in running for president this time around, and certainly were supporting the vice president. I think that the enthusiasm is real. It's partly this sense of this is going to be a little bit of an unattractive comparison because it's not fair to President Biden, but it's a little bit like the flying monkeys after the Wicked Witch melts. President Biden is no Wicked Witch. Really, he isn't. Slate, Gabfest listeners, please don't get mad at me. But there was this sense of relief at finally having a new candidate, a candidate that people could be excited about. And I think right now, Democratic voters, to use a Biden phrase, are not comparing Kamala Harris to the almighty. They're comparing her to the alternative, which was President Biden. I think her future course is not really in the hands of J.D. Vance and President Trump in terms of how they figure out how to run against her. It's whether she can be the more recent Vice President Harris, who has been crisper and a better prosecutor of her own case and of the case against President Trump, whether she can convey to people her message, her vision, her capability on the world stage and national stage, or whether she's going to be the Kamala Harris of the 2020 campaign and the beginning of the Biden-Harris presidency. which was a less effective figure. So I think this is really up to her as much as it is to anybody else. I think the enthusiasm right now among the Democratic base, among the young people who had been just so unhappy with the choice that was foisted upon them, and the energy of the donors that you mentioned, Emily, really gives her a lot of headwinds. But it's her, I'm just going to mix metaphors like John does, it's her ship to sail.
I must say I was shocked. This is the very last time, the last one in the box of being able to say this, but the old Will Rogers line, I don't belong to an organized political party. I'm a Democrat. Because Democrats are just, more frantic and have their fights in open. And for everybody to slalom behind Kamala Harris so quickly without any, fuss, it was surprising. And to the extent that Harris has a huge to-do list, she ticked off the first bits of it pretty fast, getting the congressional leaders, getting labor. She hasn't got all labor. UAW is still out there. But she did all the things you're supposed to do and has done them basically flawlessly in the days since the handover took place on Sunday. Her speech to the staff, the way she's framed her speech, which is both attacking Trump on his weaknesses, but then being very forward-oriented. Her talk about the future, we're not going back, is not only is she able to prosecute the case against Trump much better, but as generationally she prosecutes the case against his being old and his ideas being of the past in her bones, in her behavior. And that's useful. That isn't to say that she doesn't have big problems. I think the map might change now in terms of target states. I think, while she will undoubtedly do much better than Biden among young voters and African-American voters and even possibly Hispanic voters, what is yet to be seen is how she does among older white voters and among non-college white voters in the Midwest. And then, of course, we have to have the big debate about how much those groups matter and is there a trade-off? She'll probably get more college-educated white voters, even though that's a big part of the Democratic constituency that Biden would have gotten to. Maybe she gets a little bit more. Maybe her facility with reproductive rights as a campaign topic and her ability to prosecute that issue picks her up maybe even some non-college white women, which then mitigates against the decline. And then how much do those groups matter? If they do matter, and she's not going to do as well in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, does she have opportunities because of the black vote in Georgia? I don't know. I think North Carolina is probably too far to consider a battleground state, although I know everybody lists it in their battleground state groups. But does the Hispanic voters, do they come back online, and do some Republicans come online in Nevada and Arizona with her? But those are serious challenges, massive challenges ahead. So despite the amazing enthusiasm in your party, which you must have to be successful, that doesn't mean she doesn't have serious, challenges ahead.
Yeah, I've been watching Harris for a long time. I wrote a profile of her for the Times when she ran for Senate for the first time in 2016. And I was interested in her because she was this prosecutor, and she was not a super liberal progressive prosecutor really at all. Like, her line was smart on crime. She was in a city where even in 2016, you could have been a progressive prosecutor. She succeeded someone with that kind of record, which is really early in the trajectory of that whole concept. And she really tacked to the middle. And I think she basically did that as Attorney General as well. And yet, I think her biggest liability is that she can be tagged as this California, San Francisco liberal, and she has to figure out a way to get out from under that set of assumptions.
I'd love you to rewrite that piece, by the way, because I think it would be really interesting to kind of know the truth of where, and that point you just made about she could have been more liberal than she was. And I think all of those things are quite interesting about the independent choices she made, because I think you're exactly right. It's a counterbalance against the liberal charge. It's also even like her, the victory she won against, was it JP Morgan?
She was crucial to this huge settlement of all the underwater mortgages that a whole bunch of attorneys general signed on to. So yeah, that's what you're talking about.
Yes. And that was something that J.D. Vance talked about specifically in his acceptance speech, which is the fact that nobody got punished after the financial crisis of 07-09 as proof that people in power protect holding people to account for events that end up screwing the little guy.
Emily, when you wrote that piece, did you come away with an understanding yourself of who the real Kamala Harris is? Because I have to say, and I sometimes had this question about President Obama when he was a candidate. I can't really tell if she's more progressive than she wants to let on or more moderate than she wants to let on, or I don't mean to be dismissive about this, but if she really knows where she is, and in particular, maybe on a lot of issues that are not as core to her knowledge base as questions of law enforcement and prosecution.
I came away with the sense that she was kind of flexible. And I don't mean that in a way like that she has no core. I think she like deeply knows who she is and has like a really fundamental set of values. But I think some of these policy questions are about pragmatism and how you get there as much as they are about, absolutely like, I am right this second going to say that this particular thing has to happen to American healthcare, right? And especially coming from a law enforcement background, you're thinking through this prism of how to use the prosecutor's office or the attorney general's office to, lay out a kind of broader agenda. And I think what's really clear from when she was AG in particular was that she was trying to figure out a way to, protect people. Like one thing that is consistent about her is this idea that we have to make it easier to get into the middle class, to have people be able to have safety in their lives so they can do that. And also just like things like protecting people from fraud, right? Or that huge settlement. She made that settlement much bigger in terms of the number of millions of dollars that was going into the pot by holding out. Like that was her job. She had a ton of those underwater mortgages in California. And so with her as a holdout, the banks were forced to give more money. And that was something when I was talking to her, like it clearly mattered to her a lot. I think in 2016, it was less clear to her what some of the other positions were. And, that has seemed like a weakness of hers in moments since then. But I also wonder if it could right now be helpful to her because she gets to redefine herself, right? And she can kind of move. Now, the obvious move for her to make is toward the middle. That's what people do in a general election. In a sense, not having to run in a primary is like a gift because she didn't have to recently go over to the left. So, I mean, John, do you think that's what she's likely to do? And if you were her, what kinds of issues would you pick to try to maybe distance herself from the Biden administration and also just be someone who can win those swing states? Because she's never done that before.
Yeah, she can't distance herself from the Biden administration, and it's too hard to do and wastes a lot of time. I think talking about her, I think the benefit, what works when she talks about being a prosecutor against a felon and does that practiced litany of things she prosecuted that Donald Trump has been either convicted or accused of. What that does that I think is useful is it brings up all of Donald Trump's issues in a context where where it sort of slightly freshens them. One of the challenges for Democrats is that Trump has broken so many rules and so many laws that when you bring them up, people just kind of get bored and move on, even if they're Democrats. Anyway, but this is in a new context and therefore it might be freshened. But I think the second, perhaps bigger benefit is when she talks about being a prosecutor, it is a counterweight against the liberal label. Now, I don't think it solves it, but if you're playing to the idea of a long-haired hippie San Francisco person, then prosecutor mitigates against that, notwithstanding the fact that San Francisco had one of the leading progressive prosecutors, as you've detailed, Emily, in your work, or we've talked about. Nevertheless, I think that's probably the fastest shortcut to, and maybe her, if she picks an astronaut as her running mate, that also sort of puts her, clearly one of the attempts from the Trump campaign is to do what they tried to do with Obama, even though Trump wasn't a candidate. But the whole birther thing was to was a lie to otherize him, to make him seem like he cheated and was outside the American story. And they're trying to do that with Harris. So if you put an astronaut on the ticket, that probably mitigates against that. But I think our prosecutor history is probably the fastest way to do that. I've been struck from an issue standpoint that she's been talking again a lot, and this goes to your point, Emily, about the barriers to the middle class and making life possible to have opportunity in the middle class, is she's been talking about what's called, the care economy, which is basically services and support for young children, daycare centers, preschool, after-school programs, also elder care. This is all the stuff that got cut out of Build Back Better. Services for the elderly, assisted living facilities, and help for people who are taking care of, older parents, paid family leave, healthcare, improvements and protections, housing assistance, all this stuff, which is a part of the kind of building a structure around allowing people to either get into the middle class or stay there once they've gotten into the middle class. And she's talked about that a lot in her initial speeches. And that came to mind immediately when you talked about, Emily, that idea of, sort of helping people live in the middle class. And that's all straight out of the Biden playbook too. But she seems to be embracing it even more fully.
The astronaut you're referring to, I assume, was Mark Kelly, Senator.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
From Arizona.
Talking in shorthand. Sorry. I was into the fourth paragraph of the vice presidential discussion without doing the first three.
Ruth, do you have a sense of what she should focus on? What kind of vice president she should pick? Two different things.
So she should she should emphasize the issues that she's most comfortable with. John mentioned the care economy. She clearly, I have to say, I am really pissed off about J.D. Vance and these childish cat lady comments that have been resurrected. I don't think that is going to play very well. And Vice President Harris clearly cares about families and children and caregiving, and that's a real piece of her. I think there's areas in which she has vulnerabilities. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch her in particular. This is on my mind because of Prime Minister Netanyahu, watching her thread the needle on Hamas and Gaza and Israel and all of the countervailing forces that are going to come to play as she prosecutes the case in Michigan and elsewhere with young people. I think in terms of vice presidential picks, she certainly slightly changes the potential electoral landscape. I am kind of, as I think about the possibilities, I do settle on Senator Kelly as a very sensible choice. I think that the governor of Pennsylvania is an essential state, but I think Josh Shapiro is risky for a few reasons. And being Jewish, I'm just going to come out and say that I think for the reasons that I just mentioned about the volcanic nature of the Israel-Hamas dispute, I'm not sure that a Jewish American on the ticket is going to be the best for her right now. I think that Governor Whitmer doesn't seem interested, but I'm also nervous. I'm just going to keep on getting myself into potential trouble here. I'm nervous about two women on the ticket. I don't think we're ready for that. I'm not sure we're ready. I wish we were. Okay, everybody, I really wish we were. I'm not sure we're ready for a gay American on the ticket, though I think Secretary Buttigieg has done a wonderful job. We haven't even talked about whether the country is really ready for a Black woman as president, and whether that is a net benefit for the vice president as a nominee, or it could cost her in some places. So that all, to me, leads to Mark Kelly as somebody who could bring in a swing state, energize a constituency. He's not just an astronaut, he's a veteran. He is not just an astronaut and a veteran from a key swing state. He brings the energy of somebody who went through the horror that the Kelly Giffords family endured of gun violence, which is, I think, another factor that the vice president can talk about with passion, and that obviously Senator Kelly can talk about with passion, that brings in the role of the Supreme Court in making it harder for us to have a safe country and a functioning democracy. So that's kind of where I land there.
Interesting. Well, I am just journalistically excited about the reset that we are about to have and the choices that I think are available to Harris in terms of how she frames herself. I have one other theory about her, which is that she's known for, in the past, having a kind of disorganized office and a lot of turnover among her staff. And it's possible that part of why things are going better now is she has figured out how to keep good people around her, and that she has good people now, and that she has kind of settled into who she is herself in a way that will make her more skillful at these various choices. But that's a kind of rosy take on things. We'll have to see how it lands, especially as we head into the Democratic convention in August.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Let's meet our expert.
Hi, I'm Ian Khan. I'm a technology futurist, speaker, and author, and I love to help organizations measure their current state of readiness for an AI-driven world. I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, our finance team is top-notch, but small. How can AI support them? Signed, Financially Drained.
Well, financially drained, a lot is happening in finance and AI, and the possibilities are endless. First of all, AI can help your finance team analyze massive amounts of financial data faster than any human or a team of people could do. Second, it can help perform functions on data through algorithms. This can connect different systems together and really simplify decision-making for your finance team. And last but not least, AI can help reduce the time needed for data to provide insights so that your leaders can make faster decisions.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
Hi, I'm Josh Levine, one of the hosts of Slate's weekly sports show, Hang Up and Listen. Every Monday, I'm joined by Joel Anderson, who you might know from Slate's Slow Burn podcast, and Stefan Fatsis. This summer, we'll be diving into the Paris Olympics, watching Simone Biles, Sha'Carri Richardson, and Victor Wembanyama, obsessing over track, team handball, and breakdancing, and talking about the Olympic Committee's Russia ban and sex testing in elite sports. Check out Hang Up and Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, third topic. This week, Kimberly Cheadle, the very unfortunate, unlucky head of the Secret Service, testified before Congress, declined to answer a lot of specific questions about the events leading up to the assassination attempt against former President Trump. Members of Congress called on her to resign, and she did earlier this week. So now we're having an investigation within the Secret Service about what went wrong, and a bipartisan investigation from Congress, and President Biden is looking for a new head of the Secret Service. I have a couple of key kind of factual questions about my understanding of this whole incident. So one is this question about, Thomas Crooks, the shooter, he was on top of a building. That building, it seems like they should have known based on the distance from the building to where Trump was standing that someone could have fired off a shot. And yet it was outside of the perimeter that the Secret Service had direct responsibility for. So why was that? Why did the Secret Service allow the event to go forward when Crooks was flagged as being suspicious because he was kind of like walking around surveying the place before the rally and actually even had drone footage going on? And then there's this question of the last few minutes before the shooting where people started yelling, hey, there's a shooter on the roof, and yet they failed to stop the shooting at that point. Ruth, what do you feel like we need to find out? Why didn't Cheadle answer more questions in front of Congress this week? That was like such a mess.
Mess is one word for it. I've been thinking about this in the context of the Reagan assassination attempt, which in some sense was much more serious given that the bullet hit President Reagan. He could have died. That was, a terrible, shocking event. But it wasn't as bad in the sense of the clear responsibility of the Secret Service and the clear failure of the Secret Service to protect the president. John Hinckley came out of nowhere and, whether or not there were adequate perimeters in place to shield the president from him. The Reagan assassination attempt was a just much different situation. This one is like all those times when there were so many flashing lights before a terrorist attack and so many opportunities to thwart it, and they all come out in the aftermath. This guy, but just like the terrorists are never very good terrorists, this guy was not a very good would-be assassin. He so behaved in a way that put him repeatedly on the radar screen of authorities. He was walking around with a rangefinder, so do others, as they use it to, get a closer look at things. He never tried to get in. He was found numerous times. And so all of the finger pointing, well, it was local law enforcement. They were the ones who didn't do their jobs. No. The responsibility to protect officials and candidates is the responsibility of the Secret Service, and it's their responsibility to draw the perimeter properly, to make sure that vulnerable buildings are adequately secured. They're dealing with local law enforcement who are not expert at this. They need to be on top of it and directing them. They need to make sure that conversations can occur in real time so that when you have 90 seconds or 20 seconds to stop the shooter or to grab the nominee and get him off the stage, that you can do that. And none of that happened. And as to the question of why she was not able to or willing to answer more questions, that is a huge mystery to me, because if her fate had not been sealed prior to her testimony, it was certainly sealed at her testimony.
John, what do you make of all of this?
Yeah, well, just starting on that final point, I mean, I thought it was that she said, well, this is all like the FBI is investigating, can't get in the way of an investigation. But then Christopher Wray testified on Wednesday and gave a lot of detail, not everything, but you'd think at least she would have gone to the FBI and said, hey, I'm going to need some answers. Can you guys do me a solid and let me say some stuff? Because if I don't, I'm cooked. Because when you go into a hearing where the key question in the hearing is why you don't have the answers to the central questions, you should be trying to come up with answers to some kind of question, even if it's what's, your name. I mean, it just adds to the underlying central challenge of that individual testimony. So that was a big problem. I mean, one of the things I would say is a slight side road, but which I think is actually a vast and important issue, is in the aftermath of the shooting, because of people like J.D. Vance and others, there was this assumption that this was a politically motivated assassination attempt. And the threadbare nature of the evidence of what was motivating him suggests that it's almost possible, maybe we're like 98% close to being able to say this was not politically motivated. That when he was searching for the distance between Lee Harvey Oswald and John Kennedy, when he was searching both the Democratic National Convention and Joe Biden, along with Donald Trump, that essentially this was exactly what I had thought it was from the start, which was an attempt by a young white male in a very specific age group to have a spectacular suicide event, which is the profile of almost all of the other mass shooters at schools that we've encountered in our modern age. That this fits a very specific kind of pattern. So the fact that nobody had a lot of answers is also true with the fact that one of the things Ray mentioned in his testimony on Wednesday was that even the contact list of his phone was quite thin. And so the picture that emerges is one of not a lot of data, just basically. I would add, just on the Secret Service part, I talked to A.T. Smith, who's the former deputy director of the Secret Service. And he said, I think the Post reported this, I don't know if anybody else has, but that the Trump team has been asked to hold rallies only inside. So that might solve some of these problems going forward. But his point to what Ruth was saying is you can't have sniper teams or authorities to local law enforcement that you depend on. Like, it's inconsistent with the job. You need to have sniper teams and authorities out at the furthest perimeter, because you have to operate in such short notice. Not only is it crazy that the Secret Service and local law enforcement are on different channels of communication, but just the muscle memory that you have to build and the quick action and quick coordination in these moments of peril can't be created with each event the way it has to be when you're coordinating between local law enforcement and the Secret Service. So that's something that's going to have to change in the way the service operates. The only thing is, for that to change, you're talking about a massive manpower increase, which is both costly. And one of the things A.T. Smith was saying is he said recruitment is quite down in the Secret Service. And they've shortened the amount of time it takes to become an agent, and they're having trouble finding agents. So that's not a silver bullet, because it causes other possible problems in that you have to basically lower your standards to find more people.
I want to raise one thought about Kimberly Cheadle, which is the role that gender and perhaps sexism played in her demise, which I know some people feel quite strongly about. It instantly, as Republicans were asserting that this was clearly caused by Democrats fanning the flames of anti-Trump ardor, they were simultaneously arguing that Kimberly Cheadle was a DEI pick who had emphasized diversity, and in particular gender diversity in the Secret Service ranks above issues of safety and carefulness in doing her job. And I think that is unfair, and it is worth at least considering whether a male director in her circumstance would have met with the same vitriol and quick demise. And look, I am not either defending the performance of the Secret Service or her testimony, which I thought was lacking before Congress, but I am raising the gender question.
Let's do cocktail chatter. John, what are you going to be talking about when you're drinking this weekend?
My cocktail chatter is actually about dogs. And we all know from studies that dogs lower the cortisol levels of their owners, so that if you're stressed, go pet a dog, hang out with your dog, and you will become less stressed. We are in the middle of fostering a dog, and it's killing me because it's so wonderful to have a dog. And it's been a few years now since we lost our beloved George. And I'm feeling all of the, wonderful benefits of having a dog. And so I'm terrified that we'll have to give him up, though, our life has changed, and who knows if that's, if we can really handle a dog. Anyway, so I'm going through that emotional roller coaster. But in the middle of that came out a study that found that while dogs lower our stress, they do, in fact, respond to stress themselves. And what they found, and now this is only a study of 18 dogs, but what they found was basically dogs can smell stress on their owners. And that the way they tested this was that they took 18 dogs and paired them with stressed humans. And then they put a bowl of food in a new place, so a more risky place for the dog to eat. And after the dog had been in the company of the stressed humans, they would not go eat the food in the new location. So they weren't willing to take that mild risk because they had been stressed out by being around stressed humans. Conversely, when they were put in the company of mellow, chilled out, meditating all the time and surrounding themselves with Ben Shahn Prince humans, they were willing to take risks because however non-stressed humans smell, the dogs were able to pick up on that and were chill. So I found that fascinating.
Ruth, what are you going to be drinking this weekend, and what will you be talking about?
I'm not sure what I'm going to be drinking, but I'm going to use the cocktail chatter opportunity to do something work-related, which is to plug a different podcast, a Washington Post long-awaited opinions podcast called Impromptu, that features not just me, but a bevy of your favorite Washington Post columnists talking about the issues of the day. If you like Gabfest, you'll love Impromptu. So please go listen to it. Now I've earned my keep at the Washington Post. And I'm going to mention another podcast, which I've been listening to as I walk around the beautiful paths here in Wyoming, where I'm spending the summer, which is Rachel Maddow's podcast Ultra, which is now in its second season. I listened to the second season first, and then I just finished the first season. It's about Nazi sympathizers and ultra-right forces in the United States in the pre-war and post World War II period. And it is chilling. It is not quite as compelling as Impromptu, but it's really brilliantly told. And I really highly recommend it as a insight, not just into the Nazi sympathizer period, but into perhaps our current political environment.
Thank you. Love that recommendation. My chatter this week is about my European vacation. I'm just going to confess that up front. I got to go watch the second to last day of the Tour de France, which I would never have done, except I was like weirdly, randomly kind of near a village that the bikers were going through. It's a pretty small town in France called Spell. And we just like went and hung out on the road alongside the route. And what happened was that lots and lots of people, mostly French, some foreigners. We saw a Japanese flag and a British flag. People just kind of gathered on either side of the road and they hung out and waited for the bikers. And some people were live streaming. The bikers were going up an Alpine pass and then coming down. And it was a day when they were racing each other as opposed to doing a time trial. And people had a sense of where they were, either from checking online or like actually live streaming them. We were standing behind two moms who had a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old with them, and were getting the kids, like, they kept saying, look out, like, look. They were getting them excited and also feeding them biscuits to keep them occupied. And first what happened was all these crazy advertisement cars drove through. So like a car with, a huge plastic cheese and a car with like a big basket of fruit and a furniture store, etc. All these decked out cars, and the people in them were throwing swag along the road. So keychains and little packs, and we got a dish towel, hats, t-shirts. That went on for like quite a while. Then there was a pause when lots of, cop cars would come periodically flashing through. Meanwhile, it was like a pretty narrow road. And I kept thinking, like, in America, they would have us behind barricades and kind of herded into small spaces to keep everyone safe. Here, they just kind of trusted everybody to stay off of this road. Finally, the first pack of bikers, 3 of them, just flashed through. We were on a downhill, like literally instantaneously. And everyone clapped and cheered. And then we just kept doing that until the last pack of bikers made it through. And it all just felt like kind of a happening that was very much about the race, and people were excited about the race. But it was also just about like being out in the French countryside, kind of watching this event come through your small town. So I really thoroughly enjoyed that.
So it's now something new for my bucket list. Thank you.
Yeah. And of course, we have listener chatter. Thank you so much. You sent us great chatter this week. And we picked one from Chris Kennedy in Dundee in the United Kingdom. Let's listen.
Hello, Gabfest friends. My listener chatter is an interview with Gus O'Donnell, the former Permanent Secretary, the head of the UK Civil Service. The interview, part of Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart's leading series, touches on various aspects of the UK Civil Service, discussing its independence, whether it's professional enough, and the difficulty of retaining talent with public sector pay restraint. Of particular interest, though, with the recent UK election marking a change of government, is the description of ushering one PM and their government out of the door and welcoming the new one in over the course of a few hours. This, after most of the people involved have already been awake for over 24 hours over the course of the previous election night. If you enjoy that, it pairs well with an episode of Campbell and Stewart's regular podcast, The Rest is Politics, where, after some general chat about the election, they share their own experiences of election night, from the point of view of a senior government advisor and a successful candidate, respectively. I hope you all enjoy the insight.
Thank you for that, Chris. That's the end of our regular show for today, but we also have a Slate Plus episode for our beloved, adored, and vitally important Slate Plus subscribers. So we hope that you will go to Slate today and sign up for Slate Plus. And we have a particularly good bonus episode. Ruth and I are going to be talking about Judge Eileen Cannon's ruling dismissing the classified documents case against Donald Trump in Florida, based on her theory that the appointment of special counsel Jack Smith is unconstitutional. So come listen to the Slate Plus episode and sign up to listen to it if you haven't already. The Gabfest is produced by Cheyna Roth and Ethan Oberman. Our theme song is from They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director of Podcast Operations. Alicia Montgomery is the Vice President of Audio. I'm Emily Bazelon, and for Ruth Marcus and John Dickerson, thanks so much for listening. We will be back next week.